The Real Reason Behind the American Civil War. Chapter 1. The Calculus of Cotton and the Death of Compromise. Forget the history you think you know. Forget the tired cliches of brother versus brother, of a noble fight over abstract states' rights, or a simple conflict born of different ways of life. The American Civil War was not merely a tragic misunderstanding. It was the inevitable, bloody climax of a colossal national economic wager, a wager that paid out in staggering wealth for some, and in absolute human misery for millions of others. The real reason for the war is not a single point, but a perfectly intertwined, monstrous braid of cash, cotton, and human bondage, so complex and so vast that the nation had lost its soul long before the first shot was fired. To truly understand 1861, you must first look at a number you rarely see in a textbook: $4 billion. In 1860, that was the approximate financial value of the nearly 4 million enslaved men, women, and children in the southern states. To put this in perspective for a modern American mind, $4 billion represented more financial capital than all the manufacturing, railroads, and productive farmland in the entire North combined. The enslaved people of the South were not just a labor force, they were the single largest financial asset in the United States economy, a staggering concentration of wealth protected by law, custom, and the very foundation of Southern political power. This was the colossal engine the South was willing to destroy the Union to protect. The King and His Crown. In the decades leading up to the war, the world ran on cotton, and the South was King Cotton's undisputed throne. Eli Whitney's cotton gin, invented in 1793, did not just simplify the process of separating fiber from seed. It created a global commodity explosion that chained the American South to chattel slavery with an unbreakable golden fetter. By 1860, the South produced 2/3 of the world's cotton supply. The raw cotton sold generated over 60% of the entire country's export revenue. This cotton didn't just enrich plantation owners, it powered the Industrial Revolution in Europe, spinning the mills of Manchester and fueling the global economy. Southern leaders weren't arrogant, they were confident. They believed the international power of their crop, the sheer necessity of white gold, made them untouchable. James Henry Hammond, a South Carolina senator, put it plainly in an 1858 speech: "Cotton is king. No power on earth dares to make war upon it. Cotton is king." But the North was not a purely moral counterpoint to this system. The North was the banker, the insurer, the transporter, and the processor of King Cotton. New York financiers issued the loans to buy the land and the enslaved people. Boston merchants insured the vessels that carried the bales. New England textile mills bought, spun, and sold the finished product. The North was deeply complicit, yet this complicity masked a profound and ultimately irreconcilable economic divergence: the North's quiet revolution. While the South poured its wealth back into the expansion of the plantation system, buying more land and more slaves, the North was undergoing a relentless, quiet revolution that moved its economy away from an agrarian model. In the 1850s, the North was investing its capital in manufacturing and industry, producing 90% of the nation's manufacturing output by 1860. Railroads, boasting 70% of the nation's railroad track, knitting together the West and the Northeast. Free labor, establishing an economic ideology of free soil, free labor, free men, where an individual's work was considered capital, distinct from the forced, perpetual labor of another. This divergence created not two compatible partners, but two distinct societies destined for a clash of philosophies and power. The North saw the future in modernization, industrial efficiency, and westward expansion based on small, independent farms worked by free citizens.
The South saw the future only in the expansion and protection of its plantation system. Fearing that if slavery could not expand into new territories, its political power would be extinguished, and its colossal investment, the $4 billion in human capital that made the American South the richest oligarchy in the world, would vanish. And when the cannons roared at Fort Sumter, the true, agonizing reason was made clear. America was fighting over an economy built on cotton, debt, and the bodies of the enslaved. The house divided had finally torn itself apart. Outline for the remaining narrative: A Nation Divided by Design.
Part 2, The Wealth of Whiteness and the Power of Paranoia. Chapter 2, The Oligarchy's Iron Grip, detailing how 75% of Southern white families owned no slaves, yet fought a war for it. Explaining how the planter class maintained political and cultural control, tying the hopes and fears of non-slaveholders to the preservation of the system through the ideology of white supremacy. Chapter 3, The Northern Conscience and the Global Market. An in-depth look at how northern industrial fortunes, like the textile mills of Massachusetts, were dependent on southern cotton, complicating the moral narrative and creating an internal struggle within the Union. The surprising role of European powers, Britain and France, waiting for the outcome. Chapter 4, The Tariff Wars and the Treasury, exploring the economic battleground of federal policy, how the South viewed high tariffs as a direct tax on their agricultural economy, enriching northern manufacturers, and how this fueled the states' rights argument as a tool of economic defense, the little-known Morrill Tariff of 1861. Part 3, The Breakdown of Law and Order. Chapter 5, Fugitive Firestorms, focusing on the most explosive piece of legislation, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. The dramatic and highly personal stories of federal marshals chasing enslaved people into free states, effectively making every Northerner an unwilling agent of the slave economy and radicalizing abolitionist sentiment. Chapter 6, Bleeding Kansas and the Death of Democracy. A narrative chapter on how the question of slavery extension led to outright civil war in the territories, Kansas, 1854 to 1859, long before Fort Sumter. John Brown's grim role as the terrifying prophet of violence. Chapter 7, Dred Scott and the Constitution's Collapse. The Supreme Court's catastrophic 1857 decision, which ruled that black people had no rights which the white man was bound to respect, and that Congress could not prohibit slavery in any territory. This chapter explains how the South won the legal battle, but lost the moral, political, and ultimately the military war. Part 4, The Final Irreconcilable Break. Chapter 8, The Southern Honor and the Northern Condescension. Moving beyond economics to the culture clash, the South's intense martial honor culture versus the North's capitalist utilitarian worldview, and how each side came to view the other as morally and socially inferior. Chapter 9, The Four-Way Race. A detailed narrative of the 1860 election, the absolute fragmentation of the Democratic Party, and how Abraham Lincoln won a majority of the Electoral College without a single Southern vote, proving to the South that they had lost all power within the democratic system. Chapter 10, Secession's Dominoes and Lincoln's Dilemma. The final rush to secession, detailing the specific arguments used by the secession commissioners sent from the Deep South states to the Upper South states, and Lincoln's agonizing 4-month gap between election and inauguration, leading to the crisis at Fort Sumter.